This week, I'm joined by special guest co-host Tyler Shields. He's a security business veteran and a recovering researcher. Our interview this week is none other than Jonathan Sander. He's the security field CTO at Snowflake Computing. So we'll get the jokes about that out of the way in the beginning of the segment, and then dig right into it. This week in the enterprise news, NetScout takes internet scale threat protection to the edge. Splunk addresses vulnerabilities in enterprise and light products. Ping has a product announcement and some acquisition updates from Checkpoint, Dome9, CrowdStrike, Fortinet, Rapid7. We'll let you put all those pieces together and have you wait until Tyler and I go through all of the wonderful acquisitions and IPO news. So stay tuned for all that and more on this edition of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Improve the efficiency and effectiveness of your security operations with DF Labs security orchestration, automation, and response technology. Automate threat containment, orchestrate incident response, and measure operational performance with DF Labs IncMan SOAR platform. Leverage your current security resources to minimize incident resolution time, maximize analyst efficiency, increase the number of incidents handled, and reduce overall risk. IncMan SOAR acts as a force multiplier, enabling your security team to do more with less. Streamline the full incident response lifecycle automation process today. Keep your cybersecurity incidents under control with DF Labs. Visit dflabs.com/Security Weekly and request to see IncMan SOAR live in action. Stop attackers from domain credential theft and lateral movement with a 99% success rate by using artificial intelligence to control the attacker's perception of the environment. Javelin Networks is the world's first endpoint intrusion containment platform to protect domain networks. Javelin detects targeted attacks and breaches by obfuscating Active Directory, domain controllers, domain identities, domain credentials, and all domain resources. It only takes one compromised machine to jeopardize the entire organization. Don't be a victim. Visit javelin-networks.com and request a demo of AD Protect today. Are you worried about PCI compliance? Does your development team understand or care about security? Are you ready to face a breach of your customer sensitive data? See the worst that can happen before it does. Black Hills Information Security can help you help management see the future. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a web application penetration test can mitigate the risk before you go live. This is episode 112 of Enterprise Security Weekly, reporting for October 24th, 2018. I'm, of course, your host, Paul Asadorian, joined by our special guest co-host today, Mr. Tyler Shields. Tyler, welcome.
Thanks, Paul. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to have you on the show. I'm excited about this show for a whole bunch of reasons. Your insights on the news is just one of them, actually. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Quick announcement. Join us for our webcast with Signal Sciences. That's titled, Which Way Should You Shift Testing in the SDLC? It's going to be held on November 8th from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. It's going to feature myself, Larry Pesci, and Zane Lackey. I think just for Larry and Zane and to be on the same webcast is going to be just awesome. You should tune in just for the hilarity that will ensue. You can register at securityweekly.com/Signal Sciences. I want to introduce our special guest for the interview segment, which is going to happen right now, which is really exciting. Mr. Jonathan Sander is here with us. He's got a new role. He's the security field CTO at Snowflake Computing, and just an all-around great person. I'm just really blessed to have both Tyler and Jonathan on the same show. It's really awesome. Jonathan, welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly.
Thanks, Paul. Great to be here, as always.
Yes. Nice to have you. So, Jonathan, I want to start out, with Snowflake. And we were talking earlier. I was, of course, making jokes, and it's kind of like when you I felt like it was making a joke in the doctor's office, right? And a lot of times you're in the situation in the doctor's office, like we can't help but make a joke, being the kind of people that we are, right? And then you realize, because my wife works in the medical field, you realize that they've heard that joke probably 1,000 times, and it's just not funny. to them, and they just kind of look at you. So when Jonathan and I were talking, you were like, "Yeah, dude, like, all right, just have at it. Like, I've heard all the jokes, even though I've only been here a short time. I've heard all the jokes already."
I just started, so I haven't heard them 1,000 times yet. So it's okay. You can let go, but. We did ask for it kind of with a name like Snowflake, right? But
but when you get that one unique one in there, when you get that one unique one, it explodes everything. Your mind will explode when that one unique one enters the game.
That's right. Yeah, you got to work really hard and be creative to get a laugh. So that's awesome. So Jonathan, explain to our audience, what how you came to Snowflake and what Snowflake does.
Well, the last question is the easiest one to answer, right? So Snowflake Computing is the data warehouse built for the cloud, right? And if you think about what those two things mean together, data warehouses are where you put all the data, and the cloud is where most people are scared to put any of the data. So immediately, one of the intense conversations you have with a prospect is around security. And so Snowflake has actually put together a really good team. Actually, I'm just a member of a team, really. And there's a bunch of security professionals that work here at Snowflake in various different roles. Obviously, there's a whole security team locking down the platform itself. But then there's individuals like myself who are more the field, hence the field title. And I work with customers typically in the pre-sale and early deployment scenarios, helping them understand what the architectural possibilities are with our security features, and also then apply those somewhat realistically as they're trying to design what they build. And a lot of times, Paul, it's really just the security team kind of looks at the team who wants to use the platform and says, "Really? We're going to put all of that stuff in the cloud?" And then, of course, they have 1,000 questions. And so for the last month and a half, I've been getting on the phone with all kinds of security teams and ensuring them, yes, there's end-to-end encryption, and yes, there's a lot of key rotation involved, and yes, you can have a bring your own key scenario, and yes, there's network policies, and on and on and on and on, right? Taking them through all the ways that they can, have controls and get some, good sense that they're going to have security, even though they're, kind of putting their data out into the cloud, right? Which is, it's kind of interesting. People are doing all sorts of stuff in cloud today, and people don't really blink that much when they use Office 365, even though there's a lot of sensitive data, in email too. But this is the crown jewels for most companies. So talking security gets to be a big deal.
Yeah,
and that's what I've been doing.
It's interesting. I remember at RSA one year the big message was big data, right? And then we talked about actually storing stuff in the cloud. And then, we use the term data warehouse. What does that mean? Is it just a database? I mean, maybe being pragmatic, right? It's a database?
So it behaves like a database. You're exactly right? And it's actually a fully ACID compliant SQL database in our case, right? So it really is. I think my marketing people will be upset if I said just a database.
Right.
But yes, it is a database, right? And I think the distinction with a data warehouse is the way you optimize for a certain kind of workload, right? So, whereas the database you might have behind your shopping cart on your website is optimized for speed, so that when people are, clicking from, screen to screen to screen and hitting checkout, all of that stuff happens really fast with that small amount of data. A data warehouse is, I want to run a report that tells me, every person with green hair and blue eyes and, a red shirt that did this sort of business with us in these locations, and run it across this gigantic set of data that pulls in probably, all these different aspects of what we know about our customers. And essentially, you're asking really big questions of really big sets of data in a data warehouse. And so obviously you optimize differently to do that. And I think that would be the distinction I think you'd use between the two.
Sure. Now you talked about some of the security concerns. But I'm assuming, like, as we talk about cloud computing, there are security benefits too. So what are the benefits look like? Let's talk optimistically.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. No, I mean, let's put it this way, right? Right away, I mean, literally what I've just been working on all morning here, we support federated authentication for all of the use cases where you would want to, basically outsource all the authentication. That's not something you find from a lot of data warehousing platforms. And of course, it was sort of dead easy to do that when you built from the ground up in the cloud, because all of the fabric underneath you supported that, right? So all you had to do was essentially not support it in a sense, right? You just use the fabric that's underneath you and use it to your advantage. There's also things like I mentioned, the bring your own key scenario, right? That can be really challenging sometimes with traditional systems in the cloud, again, because you have the cloud communication fabric. We can pull in a key from a managed key on the customer side pretty easily, and that's, again, built into the way the fabric works. The other thing that's really interesting from a security perspective, when you think about how the cloud stuff works, is how the encryption cooperates with the elasticity. And I'll explain what I mean, right? So I mentioned, you want to do big queries, right? But you may not do them as often, right? You may do these on a daily or weekly or even quarterly basis for some people with their use cases. And what's interesting is that, let's say you had a big, giant system sitting on premises. Well, yeah, obviously that's going to involve encryption as well. And the thing is, the keys and the way to get at that data is always sort of sitting there, which means it's always targetable in a sense, right? Both from an insider perspective and an outsider perspective. What's really cool about the elastic nature of the cloud is when we spin up a bunch of compute to act on the data, that compute's ephemeral. It comes, it does its work, and it goes away. And that's a business advantage, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff we could say about that. But from the security point of view, that also means that the only place where your data is ever acted on using the keys and decrypting and then actually returning results and stuff, that whole part of the platform is ephemeral. It comes, it uses the keys, and then it just goes away. There's no persistent target there for anyone to go after in that sense, which is super cool, right? Which means also, like, even if someone were to sort of hop in and get like sort of the insider advantage, the only way they can really get to the data is through the front door. There's no thing sitting there to sort of hack into a back way, like, because it literally doesn't exist unless you make a legitimate query to make it exist, right? So right away, that affords some really cool stuff, and that's pretty cloud unique, right? I could probably go on, but I think those are the three good examples where the cloud definitely has given us the ability to be more secure than traditional on-prem systems in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I'm sure, Tyler, you probably have this conversation as, you coach quite a few startups. And, for my own startup early on, we were looking at, okay, we want to deploy in the cloud. And then we're like, okay, there's costs with compute, with storage, and with data in and out. And who absorbs those costs? How do we control those costs? Which ones do we pass through? Which ones do we include in our pricing and packaging? And it can sound kind of simple, and then once you dig into it, like my brain starts to hurt, and then we're like, we need an expert to come in and help, like Tyler or others to help come in and coach us on this, because there's a lot of decisions, and I'm sure Snowflake was faced with similar decisions, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, so the way that the model works here, right, is essentially the storage. It's all using storage that's already built into the cloud platform, right? And so the costs there are pretty stable and well known. And let's put it this way: if you're going to have the data in the cloud for anything, the costs are going to basically be equal there. The thing that you pay for is the compute that you use, and as I already mentioned, right, that kind of comes and goes, which means you only pay for it while you're using it. Right, so that's sort of the business side of that benefit that I was talking about before. Right? The security benefit is obviously it's not sitting around persistently waiting to be attacked. The cost benefit is, it's also not sitting around costing you money. You only pay for it when you're using it, right? And that's it. And then obviously maybe there are tiers of the system, and the higher the tier goes, the higher the rate that you would pay that at, right? Mm-hmm. That's a vast oversimplification of the whole thing, but that's the basic model.
There's a whole bunch of math involved.
Yes,
for sure. Tyler, sorry, did you have questions? I don't mean to.
No. I mean, in a lot of the startups that I work with, the key there is getting predictable, right? And designing and engineering your solution in a way that gives you some kind of predictability on the usage. Okay, so usage of the data storage, the usage of the inbound and outbound requests to the data storage, the usage of the compute, and then correctly predicting and passing through those costs directly to your customer in a way that you can turn a profit on, right? And so fundamentally, if you're building a business on some of these data storage technologies, which pretty much everybody is doing, you have to do it in a way that you can be extremely efficient and predictable.
Yeah.
It's interesting. One of the advantages I think Snowflake has over a lot of other platforms that have built on the cloud is exactly as you say, Tyler. You're 100% right? Predictability is key. But the data warehousing world has been around a long time, right? So there is a lot known about how those workloads behave, and there's a lot of expertise essentially too to tell you, okay, this is how we've been running on Netezza or Teradata for the last 20 years or something. So unlike some of these newer platforms where it was innovation on, it was completely new technology, Snowflake is doing something that's been done before, just doing it in a different, innovative way, right? But that means that our ability to be predictable is, a lot stronger, because we can actually just look at, we can ask the customer, well, how is it that your workloads have behaved? And then we can work with them to make sure it, makes sense. And obviously design the architecture to also be nice and secure and locked down and make them feel good about that part.
Yeah, the more intelligence that your provider has around how to guide you on building your environment on top of their scenario will allow you to create efficiencies in how you do your business, and that's really what it boils down to.
And I'm sure.
Now, let me go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to say, I'm sure a common question you get too along the lines to delve back into the security side is, how separate is my data from everyone else's, and how easy or difficult is it for someone that may gain access to the cloud platform to kind of jump over into my environment?
Right. There are like three questions you get all the time. One of them is about the networking stuff, another one's about the authentication side, and the third one is always about data isolation. So the data isolation is achieved through two different mechanisms, right? It's through encryption, right? And that's probably the strongest one. But there's also policy isolation, right? Now I'll let you in a little secret, right? Underneath the covers, right? Let's talk AWS just to make it simple, so we can use some exact terms, because we run on Azure and AWS, right? So, but just not to muddy the waters, I'll stick to AWS. But it's pretty much the same on Azure. An S3 bucket in the AWS world, right? It's a shared service, and we use that for our storage. And at the bottom layer, right, it's all mixed data. The notion that you have a bucket and somebody else has a bucket, and that's all sort of window dressing, right? Like, the way that they make the elastic work, in the sense, is to have that all be provisioned underneath, and it's all protected by policy, right? And obviously what we do is we build on top of that, right? So we put policies that are even more exact, which means that a customer's data is always going to be isolated by policy to some specific part of some specific bucket that's under our control from a policy standpoint. But the data is also contained in files, and those files are encrypted with keys that are unique to each account, right? And if we're getting technical, an account is actually a structure that lives below the level of a customer. A customer might have multiple accounts, but You get the idea. And you have keys. You have a key hierarchy that's actually 4 layers deep before you get to the file, and you have wrapping of keys throughout there. And then the idea is that each file has a unique key, and those keys are uniquely wrapped ultimately by a key that's mapped to a customer. And if you're using sort of one of the higher level editions, you can do the bring your own key scenario where essentially you give us a key that we put into the hierarchy, and then we have a composite key at the account level, which means that if you yank the key from us, not even we can get to your data at that point, right? So you have isolation, a policy layer, you have isolation on the encryption layer. And if you're really super paranoid, we do offer what's called a virtual private Snowflake, which is the highest level. That's literally where we'll stand up a completely isolated instance for you. But in the end, right, that still is going to use shared services like S3 and other parts from on the Amazon side, blob storage and such on the Azure side. So even the virtual private, right, you're using shared services, but now you have isolation to the point where every single thing is dedicated to just your account or accounts, right? And some people with high regulatory burdens have opted for that, right? But certainly walking people through these conversations and letting them see that you've got multiple levels of isolation involved, even though you have the shared services, that is a big thing. And it takes a little while for people to sort of wrap their heads around it because they're used to having a server they can sort of hug, from their on-premise days, and so it's a bit of adjustment, especially for the data warehousing guys who probably aren't as exposed to the cloud in many cases.
Have we? Go ahead, Tyler. No, go ahead.
Well, I have a quick follow-on question on that. I don't follow the breaches in the data storage space all that closely. I don't sit there and analyze them over time, and I'm sure you guys do. Is it me, or is the real quantity of breaches that occur at the data layer up in cloud applications? It's not generally because of an isolation issue, anyways. It's not because you're sharing a bucket or something like that, or you're sharing a virtual bucket. It generally comes down to, most of the time, configuration errors or something at the application layer that allows trickle through, right? How do you guys help with any of that, or is that something you bring to the table?
It's funny. I do get asked about that, but those are the easy questions, right? Because you're absolutely right. It all comes down to configuration. You've seen S3 breaches, right, in the headlines. It totally happens. But that's like everyone that I'm aware of, and I'm sure one of your viewers can probably dig up one that I'm not aware of and prove me wrong if I said all. But everyone I'm aware of has been one of two things, right? The most common is that you see S3 with public access enabled, right? And that's just somebody who clicked on the wrong thing. And Amazon's actually done a really good job in the latest versions of their UI and command line to really make it kind of difficult to do that by mistake, right? So I think you'll see that drop off. It might have been a little too easy to do that previously, but now I think they got it under control. The other is our good friend CORS. The cross-object resource scripting, right? So that causes problems in web apps all over the place, right? And because people will use S3 as storage for web applications that are publicly facing, and they need to enable CORS policies to allow for certain, legitimate interactions, sometimes they can get the details of that wrong. And, as you know, there's a lot of ways to play CORS in web apps. Forget the storage layer, right? But since that plays at the S3 layer, you see misconfigurations there too, and that's where you get, I think, the more sophisticated breaches, where, as you said, there's sort of leak through because essentially you have application configuration that's there for what was supposed to be legitimate reasons, but it left a little bit of room for somebody with enough determination to find a way to grab some data out of that bucket.
My sense of the market today is that the adoption of putting your data and applications in the cloud and having that hesitation to do that is largely diminishing, that most organizations now are pretty open to the idea now in being able to manage the risk of putting applications in a general sense in the cloud. Do you still get that sense today, Tyler and or Jonathan, or are there still like justified use cases where no, they really shouldn't go into the cloud because of security?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, right? I mean, I guess there's that old saying: it's hard to convince someone of an idea that is against how they earn their living, right? So
Sure.
I may not be the most reliable source to a lot of people's opinion on that one, but I will say most of the people we're talking to are okay with this idea. Right now, there's a little selection bias. Obviously, they're talking to us. They're clearly already considering
Right.
putting this data in the cloud, but there are certainly in larger organizations you have a lot of diversity in the sense that the people who run data warehousing, they've got nothing to do with the people who might have adopted Dropbox or use Office 365 or brought in some SaaS application on the marketing side, right? Like these people have nothing to do with any of that, and they might have completely independent resources and stacks, and even completely independent IT budgets. And so for them, it's the first time, right? And so they're considering a lot of these questions for the first time. And you can imagine the larger and more complex and more regulated the organization, the larger the concern and the oversight and the security reviews will be in complexity. So it's not everybody, right? But I guess, again, that selection bias, I'm being brought in specifically to help with those kind of conversations, right? So I'm seeing the end of the spectrum, specifically where they're not as happy to do it, right? But I think generally you're right. Like in general, if you took it on an average, you're right that it is getting to the point where people are more comfortable.
Tyler, do you have comments there? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think in general, people are being desensitized to the risk there, and I think it's an appropriate desensitization. To be honest with you, I think all of the SaaS applications that have come out over the last 10 years have really made people realize, hey, we can safely put stuff in the cloud, and it changes our risk profile, it changes our threat profile, our threat landscape, et cetera. But it's not a super increase in risk comparatively. And I do agree that we're at 20 or 30% where maybe we've been at 10% in the past, right? So it's desensitizing, it's growing over time.
And also, I'm hearing
about it, right? Like if you look at the security profile of AWS and how they run their data center, and you look at like Azure and how they run their data center, if you could even begin to claim that you had that level of security controls and orchestration and automation, I'd be very impressed, right? Like these guys are really doing it right.
The easy way to look at this is look at all the youngest startups that you're finding. How are they building their businesses from the ground up? They're building their businesses from the ground up, putting everything in the cloud, everything externally accessible. Very few of them even require VPNs for a lot of their access to the data in general, right? The perimeter's gone. And so if we look at these guys as being the next Cisco, Symantec, whatever, the next big company, it's a matter of time, right? Over time, it's just going to continue to desensitize.
I mean, it's interesting. One of the clashes that we get into is actually the clashes of good security principles from sort of the on-prem age and now the zero trust cloud age, right? Where we've built our platform to be end-to-end encryption, so that you can have confidence that regardless of where someone's using the product, right, in a coffee shop or on premises or anywhere in between, you've got end-to-end encryption with TLS, and you've got encrypted data in that tunnel, where you've got 2 layers of encryption, which obviously that's a good security decision. But then you go to these large organizations and they're doing packet inspection. And they get a little upset that, they open these packets and they find, stuff they can't really recognize because that's encrypted. They get upset that they have to go to the complicated configuration steps of having my certificates pass through so that my end-to-end encryption actually functions and doesn't think there's a man in the middle. And these are both good security principles, right? Like it's a good idea to do inspection, and it's also a good idea to have end-to-end encryption, but they're in conflict, right? So it's interesting. I think like we're gonna see over the next couple of years, like stuff like that work itself out, right? Where good ideas that are in conflict are going to have to figure out which one wins in the end, right? I think it's obvious which one I'm rooting for in that particular fight, but I think that's going to happen a lot,
So, Jonathan, if there are people in the audience who are like, yeah, like this sounds like a good idea, whether they're security architects or, network architects or working with data warehouses. How do they get more information? I think we talked about reaching out to you directly, to get more information. As some of our audience is a lot of our audience working for enterprises, right? And a lot of our audience works in the security industry and is listening for our, our coverage. And those are both use cases that could be applicable here.
Sure. I mean, obviously, if what you're looking for is more information on Snowflake computing, just in general, I would just start with the website, obviously, snowflake.com. But if you are the security guy, which obviously, considering where I'm at, is very, very likely, and you're kind of scratching your head thinking, oh, maybe I would suggest this to my data guys, but I'm not sure. You can just reach out to me. I'm on, obviously email is easy, jonathan.sander@snowflake.com. You can get the spelling of my name from the from the show, and or you can just hit me on Twitter, Sander IAM, on Twitter, and or LinkedIn, also Sander IAM. Any channel works. Ping me, and we can talk security all day long.
Awesome. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Tyler. Great to be here. Good conversation, and good luck on the second segment.
Thank you very much. With that, we'll take a short break and come back with the Enterprise Security News, so stay tuned.